Hi, good evening, and welcome to this CPDme webinar on this. Oh gosh, what day is it again? Where are we? Is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday? I think it's Tuesday. My name is Andrew Ormerod, and I'll be facilitating tonight's webinar, and I'll very shortly be handing you over to Phil with an introduction to LGBTQIA and dementia. So for those who are new to webinars, we can't see or hear you. So if you're sat there in your pajamas, then don't worry, please, because we can't see you. And equally, we can't hear you. So if you have got a microphone, you don't need to worry because we can't tap into your conversation. CPD members will get a certificate tonight. In fact, I think they decided, the team, that everybody will get a CPD certificate for attending tonight. So you don't need to worry. So everybody will have one in the morning, and that will come to you by email. And also, if you have a copy of the CPDme mobile app, the app will notify you once that CPD certificate arrives. And of course, everybody will get access to a copy of the recording that will be sent tomorrow. If you're on social media tonight, then please do share with us a snapshot of what you're up to, maybe what your interests you around tonight's webinar, maybe whether you sat there with a cup of tea, maybe with a dog or cat on your knee, who knows, but share with us at Twitter at CPDme and also hashtag CPD Made Simple. I think we're going to have Instagram on there next week because we've just started appearing on Instagram, but all these social media channels are very new to me and it always confuses me, as I've just been discussing with Phil. If you're not a member of CPDme, then why not? Because it is literally £1.99 for a trial, and literally it will make recording your CPD super simple. So we've got a team of researchers, including myself and a couple of doctors with PhDs in CPD that support the system. And we have got the most easiest to use mobile app that I am aware of in the world, in fact, because we've also not just got a UK market, we've got massive customers in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and I think Somalia we've just brought on board, which is just like, wow. So please do consider joining us as a member. You can scan that QR code, or you can jump over to the website at cpdme.com, or just Google search CPD Portfolio Building Made Simple. But it does allow you to record and capture your CPD really easily. It allows you to backdate CPD as well as forward date and plan it, and allows you to really simply capture your evidence using the Fab technology inside your mobile app. We always live stream to YouTube, so if you ever can't get onto one of our live webinars, then please do jump over to our YouTube channel, where you can literally dial in 2 minutes behind the live broadcasts, but it's unlimited, so we can have tens of thousands of people watching on there. And also we feature some up and coming webinars as well as some of the previous recordings on our YouTube channel, so please do subscribe to us at youtube.com/cpdme. You know we love a little competition here, so I'm going to post some links into the chat as Phil gets underway. And if you leave us, or you are a user of CPDme on our webinars and you enjoy them, or you don't enjoy them and you want to do something different or see something different, then please do leave us a genuine review on Trustpilot, on the Google App Store or the iOS App Store, or Google itself, and we will tonight do a raffle. And I've got a couple of giveaways tonight, so please do leave us some genuine feedback. And I emphasize, it has to be genuine, and then we'll do a little raffle at the end. If you're a CPD champion, then please do download our poster. Our March poster has just gone live, so you can scan that QR code and download our March poster, and you can share that in your workplace. And of course, you will probably know this, that if you do share it in your workplace and we see you on Twitter, you'll be in the chance to grab one of our vouchers, Amazon vouchers, that we like to give away to our winners and participants. So if you promote the posters in your workplace, then make sure you tag us in on social media. As I said, if you haven't downloaded the CPDme app, then please do, because it also makes capturing your CPD simple, but it equally makes registering for these webinars even easier, because you can literally just register with the app and then click the webinar with one button, and it fully registers you, and then it tells you that you're registered and also reminds you when your webinar is going live. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Phil now, talking an introduction to LGBTQIA and dementia. Are you there, Phil?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll just share my screen with me. Hopefully that's sharing okay now.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, thank you for that introduction. So my name is Phil Harper. I'm a senior lecturer at Arden University, and I specialise and I do a bit of research. I'm doing my doctorate currently looking at LGBTQ plus dementia care, particularly look at gender neutrality. And I know we do have another webinar booked where I'll really be exploring that concept in more detail. But this session is just going to be more of an introduction to some of the key concepts. And I'll be looking particularly at microaggressions within dementia care and looking at dementia care settings and how they can be more inclusive. So first of all, I've got some of these statistics here. Now, we don't actually know the true number of people with dementia generally, particularly because our statistics are quite out of date. We were waiting for an updated statistics, but unfortunately the situation with COVID has kind of delayed that. But also just due to limited diagnosis rates, etc., actually knowing the true numbers of people living with dementia is quite difficult. But then if we add on the complexity of older LGBTQ plus people and there's a lot of stigma around that and people going back into the closet for some of the reasons that I'm going to discuss, actually statistics are very difficult. But we can estimate that there could be around 85,714 gay and lesbian people with dementia in the UK, and that is not including trans, people who don't identify as gay and lesbian, bisexual, etc., more gender diverse individuals. So actually we're starting to see that the numbers are fairly high, and actually this is an area that needs far more support. And then one of the key things that I am going to be exploring is microaggressions. And when we think about microaggressions, these are subtle, often non-intentional forms of discrimination. A big focus or a big reason why I found this is because I believe in health and social care, we're starting to move away from more overt discrimination. I say that we're starting to, we still see it, but it's less common. And now it's about really having that cultural competence and having that ability to actually fully support different communities. And these microaggressions are key. And within, according to Nadal et al. And their team of researchers, microaggressions, particularly LGBTQ plus microaggressions, come under the 4 characteristics here. And this is terminology that discriminates against an LGBTQ plus person, the enforcement of heterosexual norms, disregarding people's individual experiences, and not accepting that people of an or people from the community have specific needs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explore these 4 areas, and I'm going to be applying these to dementia care settings and really explore how this can look like, or what this can look like in dementia care. So first of all, terminology that discriminates against an LGBTQ person. So we've got misgendering individuals, particularly if somebody's transgender, and not asking pronouns. So in dementia care, we're really good at making sure that we refer to people as they want to be known as. We know that if somebody's been in the forces, they might still want to be referred to as their rank or their rating. But why aren't we asking actually what somebody's pronouns are? And we can do this in a very clever way where it doesn't maybe make everybody feel uncomfortable. We can just say, how would you like me? What would you like me to call you? What would you like me to refer to you as? And then we can get an idea about pronouns that way. So we actually need to broaden this idea of making sure that we refer to people as they want to be known as. We've also got labeling individuals. So be careful about using current terminology, but also using terminology that's wrong. So we're not a homogenous group, the LGBTQ plus community. There's loads of letters at Q, I, A, 2, S, P, K, I believe is the old acronym. So there's a lot of identities. We've got gay, bisexual, transgender, lesbian, pansexual people, which is about being attracted to the person, not the gender. And then we've got other people like Two-Spirit, which is First Nation, different genders. We've got people who are non-binary that come under this banner. So we've got all of these different identities, and they have specific needs, but also different labels. And you've got the Q as well, which is quite an interesting one, which is queer. And that was reclaimed in the 60s. And sometimes older people might not like that. Remember it being used as a negative term. So actually, we need to be careful about using that term. But also, I see it go totally the other way, and people totally disclude it and forget actually it was in the 60s it was reclaimed. So actually, maybe older people do want to be known as that term. So it's again about asking and not assuming. And this is something with the terminology, different identities, not assuming that somebody would identify with that. So again, it's about asking and exploring people, what people actually identify as. So the next one here is the enforcement of heterosexual norms. So I quite often call this heteronormativity. And if you were at the last webinar I did do, where I introduced some concepts in a more generic form, so there's going to be a bit of overlap with this session, but I did talk a little bit about heteronormativity then, but this is about assuming heterosexuality. So one of the key examples we see is when somebody is admitted to a care home or a care setting or even a hospital, or you maybe are still filling out people's paperwork, but you want to create some chat if you are a paramedic, etc. You can, you might then ask if they've got a heteronormative partner. So if it's somebody who's presenting as a male, you might ask, actually, have you got a wife? And this really shows that you're not open-minded, not accepting that people actually might not have that heteronormative partner. So using gender neutral terms like just have you got a partner would be far more inclusive, and it might not lead to somebody feeling like they're outing themselves, which can be quite a scary process in that moment. Or it might encourage somebody to actually feel comfortable to state their sexuality. We've got heteronormative imagery. Now, when we think about care homes, we think about different settings. We quite often see posters, we see images, leaflets, everything that is so heteronormative and cisnormative. So we're looking about actually how these settings can actually show that they are inclusive by having inclusive imagery. And this isn't just LGBT, it's about all characteristics and all backgrounds and identities and ethnicities, etc. But it's something that we don't really see with the LGBTQ community too much. So things like in doctor's surgery, it'd be fantastic if you had some leaflets on LGBT health, because when you see yourself identified, you feel supported. And care homes, for example, when you've got posters up about Valentine's Day, if it's only heterosexual people you see, you might not feel comfortable. We've got assumptions about how a person should dress. Now, particularly when people living with dementia, we've got to think about actually somebody want to wear. Are they just conforming to social norms? Are they actually indicating to you that they want to wear something different? And sometimes we need to be non-judgmental. It could be that somebody does want to wear clothes that is typically associated with the opposite sex or gender. It could also be that they quite like a different presentation. So there's very much within the LGBT community, we do quite like our alternative presentations. So it's about not making these assumptions, particularly, and again, the next webinar will really explore this. When somebody living with dementia maybe is wanting to present in a more gender neutral way, let's not see it as a failure to present their gender. Let's see that actually that could be who somebody is. They might be gender non-conforming. So this is some things that we need to think about. We need to break down that kind of heterosexual matrix, that whole framework of looking at things, and actually allow somebody to be an individual person. Another thing is not recognizing same-sex partners. So particularly in hospitals, quite often people are seen as just a friend. And this is something that we need to really break down and actually let people have the same rights as a heterosexual partner. Now, this is improving, particularly with same-sex marriage. There is a little bit more recognition, but it's still a bit of an issue. And also understanding that older people might not see the point in getting married if they've been with their loved one for like 20, 30 years, and they might say, oh, there's no point in us getting married now. So they might not be married. So actually, in one way, they will still face a lot of issues and might still be seen as just a friend. So we do need to break that down, but also understanding that somebody might have a best friend that is also the closest person to them, particularly if somebody isn't in a partnership. And we quite often, sometimes when we become estranged from our families, we create what we call a family of choice. So these are some of the individual needs. Now, this isn't exhaustive, but it gives an idea of some of the things to think about. We've got disregarding people's experiences. So particularly for trans people, I've heard loads of stories where older people, particularly people with dementia, people with other medications, other comorbidities, are taken off their medications, and this is because they see it as polypharmacy. So they say, oh, actually hormone treatment, medication or hormones aren't important, it's what we've got to look at somebody's physical health too much more, and it's not really considering the individual's wishes. So this is something that we've really got to fight. And actually this happens when you go to somebody, let's say you might ignore somebody's family of choice because they're estranged from their family, speak to somebody, their family, and they won't see the importance of actually this on a person. So again, it ties in with that previous point a little bit. So this is something that we need to think about and actually think about the individual experiences, and we need to try and work harder to listen. And something here that's really important is things like lasting or advanced care plans and stuff where this can be documented, but we'll kind of explore that a little bit later. Respecting the wants in individuals that is LGBTQ+. So we quite like our flags. I always think that, I know if I went into a care home, I would probably have all my identity flags, and I've got a few because we're all very complicated, and it would, my room would be very different. And I think it's about understanding that actually we need to have this individualistic, personalized approach. And these are things that we say that we want to do with everyone, but it seems to just not happen when it comes to LGBTQ stuff. I can't explain why. I think it's just because we ignore it. We only see the heterosexual matrix because of the world is so heteronormative. We kind of forget that actually there's these other individual needs that happen. So thinking about that, thinking about the needs that somebody might want, they might still want to go to Pride, etc. And that really comes on to the next point here, or then this next section. Very much, we quite often disregard the impact of being LGBTQ and only really hold a medical approach to treating an individual. So we don't always think about some of the negative experiences, the importance of sexuality, the importance of your expression when we are looking after somebody. We will become very task orientated, we will focus on personal care, etc. But actually something like being taken to Pride could be such an incredibly important part of somebody's well-being. And we are getting better in care homes and in hospitals, etc., about activities, etc. But this is something that we do need to think about actually, and we need to think about maybe these are important aspects to who somebody is and the ability to express somebody's sexuality. And for example, we talk a lot about meaningful activities, and it could be that you might even have a drag queen who's now in a care home, and you might need to support. Part of personal care might be helping them now to put their makeup on and to still be in drag. So we need to break down some of these heteronormative approaches to care. Not appreciating difficulties. So there's a lot of things. So it's LGBTQ plus History Month at the moment. So we very much explore some of these concepts about what's gone on in the past, and not concept but experiences. So you've got things like some negative treatments. It was only in 1967 that homosexuality or homosexuality between men generally was decriminalized. So there was a lot of negative experiences that maybe older people now have experienced. And then you've got things like taboo, you've got the AIDS crisis, You've got even Section 28 even fitting in a little bit there, because it was kind of like a bit of propaganda. All of these things could lead some quite traumatic experiences that a lot of heterosexual peers might not have gone through. And I think it's important, we're not trying to compare, we're not trying to make this competition, but these are added complexities. So actually understanding this really might help you to do personalized care. I always have this massive rant about memory lanes, because we see them a lot in care homes, and sometimes you have them in community settings where you will have a room where it's all got memories all of the way around the room, but we're forcing people to then do reminiscence, and it might not be culturally sensitive, and it might bring back painful memories. And this isn't even just for LGBTQ+, it's quite prevalent for the community. It could be also for people who served in the forces. If you've got a lot of forces related reminiscence, it could bring back things like PTSD, etc. But as I said, this is quite prevalent for our community. And it's not really appreciating that people might have individual specific needs, trying to force people into a one fits all type of thing. We've got family of choice, again, what I spoke about before, understanding that the LGBTQ community, we are more likely to not have family around us sometimes due to differences of opinion, being ostracized, etc. So quite often having this family of choice is quite a unique thing. So we need to actually think about who we're involving, and maybe a key part here is about involving the community early on for advanced care plans, etc., to then be able to make that more of a formal process. Also having safe spaces. Something in care homes, I quite often hear people always ask me the question that what happens if another resident is homophobic towards one of the residents who are LGBTQ+. And I think the importance is that it's very difficult. If they've both got dementia, for example, you can't really tell off the person because they might have dropped back to a previous point in time, which causes many issues. It might bring back homophobic opinions, but also for the LGBTQ+ person, might bring them back to a time where they felt more scared. So for both, it's kind of caused this really complex situation. But then what you do need to do is you need to have a safe space that a person can go to that isn't their bedroom, because if you bring someone just straight to their bedroom, kind of feels a bit like a punishment. So actually maybe you're having another room at the time, making sure that you've got plenty of spots that you can maybe go to that are safe spaces. Now, it's not always the easiest thing to do, but I think that is a key thing that you should really try to do, because again, if you get brought back to your bedroom when somebody's been maybe homophobic against you, you kind of feel punished for who you are, and then that can have leading impacts. But also for the person, you can't do that to the person who's homophobic, because at the same time, they've dropped back to a previous point where maybe language was more accepted, homophobic slurs were more accepted. They might not realise what they're doing is wrong, and it's also a bit of a tricky situation there. So it's just about trying to make the environments a bit more safe. So that is really a bit of an overview of some of the key microaggressions, and really an introduction to some of the complexities. As I said, it's not exhaustive. There are many other complexities, and I'm more than happy to, if anybody's got any questions or anything, to explore that with some of the questions. But that is an overview, some ideas there. So impact, when we think about personhood in dementia care, there's somebody called Tom Kitwood who's a professor of dementia care at Bradford, and really built upon this idea of personhood. So this being your authentic self and being who you are, and having that really maintained. And really all of it fits, but something called malignant social psychology that Tom Kitwood talks about, and it's very much about these, a bit like the microaggressions, it has a massive overlap, these subtleties in providing care for somebody, and how it can maybe be not the most supportive social environment. So a lot of those things that we spoke about, microaggressions, really fit into the religion and social psychology. But a really key part that they spoke about was labelling. And as I said, we've explored this idea of labelling and this idea of how the label can make assumptions. People can have stereotypes. They can just assume that somebody is a certain way, and that we need to break that down. Somebody called Dawn Brooker, who's a professor on Tom Kitwood's work, and created the VIPS model. And this is about valuing the individual's perspective, and the social environment. And all of these are incredibly important. And we need to sometimes look beyond our, particularly if we are looking after somebody from a different identity or perspective from ourselves, we need to think about how do we break from our own view. And then heteronormativity, this concept of those heterosexual norms. And when we think about how that might make us feel if we don't feel like we fit in because everything is catered towards a heterosexual, cisgendered market or client base or service users, we sometimes feel banished. And this has a massive impact on our personhood and self, because we don't feel like we're being accepted, and we maybe start to internalize that and maybe not accept ourselves. So these are some of the things, these are the impacts, particularly on a person with dementia who maybe is a little bit more vulnerable, maybe has some communication difficulties, which mean that they can't communicate their needs as easily. And we need to actually support that. So in one way, we need to try and be aware of it as much as well to help somebody to express their wants, needs and wishes. If you came to my last session, I spoke about the panopticon. So this is Foucault. Foucault's a sociologist and built upon this design of a prison. And it's around prison, and you've got the central watcher. And this is an analogy of how we internalize and self-regulate ourselves. So when we look around this prison, we've got the cells. And if we think everybody's in a cell outside, now the strength of this design of prison is that you don't need as many prison guards, because you can sit in the middle and you can watch anybody at one time. So then people are fearful that they can be watched at any one time. So actually start to self-regulate and start to behave because they could be watched at any one time. It's a very efficient model. And Foucault says that actually society works this way, and that we quite often internalize social norms and ways of being and society's rules, etc. So if we think about the central watcher and how maybe it promotes heteronormativity, people might then start to internalize heteronormative norms. People might then actually, particularly in care environments and people with dementia, who maybe are, again, a little bit more vulnerable, but also drop back to a previous time where they think that central watcher is maybe more abusive, less inclusive, actually they might start to the closet. So when we think about providing support, we need to think about this central watcher and how do we make sure that people, particularly people with dementia who maybe drop back to previous points in time, we can keep on reassuring that somebody that it is actually a more supportive time and that they're in a supportive setting. And we'll kind of explore some examples of that, or things we can do a bit. Another thing we've got to think about are humanistic approaches. So we need to remember that actually when you are younger, and this is even the case now, but it'll be even more prevalent back in history. So actually for older people now, when they were younger, the feeling of not being supported because you're maybe from the community would be massive. And the impact this would have on your self-esteem, who you are, your development is massive. And this is what Carl Rogers, who really was one of the fathers of person-centered care, really speaks about within a lot of their humanistic theory. Says that people need to feel like they've got unconditional positive regard. So they need to feel like you were loved. And if you haven't had that, or you perceive you didn't have it, even if you did, this really doesn't have an impact on you. So when we think about people coming into services, particularly from a time that was even less accepted. This is still prevalent now, but if we think about a time where it was even less accepted, we've got to think that actually we really do need to work a bit harder on making sure that people feel accepted. And again, about breaking down that central watcher and constantly working towards making an area quite inclusive and actually working towards making people feel like they are included and accepted. Building again upon Kitwood's work here, this is something that Kitwood created, this flower model. And Kitwood says that everybody needs to feel loved, to feel supported. And this is particularly relevant for people with dementia, because sometimes the care professional or the health and social care professional, the people supporting them, need to make this happen a little bit more. You need to actually work harder, because somebody with dementia might just need that extra support needs. So what Kitwood says is that somebody needs to feel comfortable. Now, this can be physical comfort, but it could be psychological comfort, that you feel comfortable where you are. You need to have your identity embraced. And obviously, when we think about LGBTQ community, we think about what somebody's identity is and who they are and how they like to present themselves. Again, we think about occupation. And when we think about LGBTQ plus occupations, we might be breaking down gender norms. Again, it could be that you've got a drag queen. And when we think about the future of aging, where we've got more people doing drag due to, we probably will have more drag queens coming into care homes and people who still want to still do drag. And I'm seeing it now. I look at a lot of the drag communities. I'm part of the drag community myself, and I know a lot of aging drag queens that are still doing drag now. So actually, when they do go into care, they might still like to do a bit of that aspect of their occupation. Got inclusion, so all these things about feeling included, and actually listening to your needs and feeling like you're comfortable and safe in your environment. And attachment, so having everybody who's important to you included. So this could be family of choice, it could be a same-sex partner, etc. So all these things that we need to think about to make sure that somebody feels loved. And these really do apply to the people in the LGBTQ plus community. This was a quote from somebody that I spoke to, who had their partner, he had his husband in a care home, and this happened really sadly shortly before his other half died. And this is something that he told me, and it really stuck with me. So and I've got permission to be able to say this, but this is, or say this quote, and I think this is really important. It really hits home the impact of these microaggressions and how they are real impacts. So this is the quote. So it's, when my other half was in a care home, posters all had heterosexual couples on. He's scared to invite me for Valentine's Day as I might not fit in. And as I said, this person passed away a couple of months after, and he wasn't there for Valentine's Day with his husband because he didn't feel like he didn't fit in. So this is real impacts, and it really does make people feel excluded, make people feel like they don't fit into this setting. So this is why we need to start being more inclusive and really actually improve people's lives. There's other forms as well, and I think I always make this point, and on pretty much all of my presentations, I make it clear that it's not just about being LGBTQ+, because we need to look at things from an intersectional lens as well. We need to look that actually there might be somebody who's got dementia, who's gay, and is also Black or Asian, etc. And they will then face the racism. They'll also face heteronormativity, and they'll face ageism and ableism through having dementia. So we got to look at, actually, there's going to be some quite unique experiences that a person's going to be experiencing, and it might make things far more complicated. And actually, some people just give up. When somebody has really complicated needs, sometimes people just give up, but that's not what we need to do. The intersectionality. So we need to think about racism, and indirect racism is one example of microaggressions against race and ethnicity. We've got assumptions on individuals' abilities. So again, when I spoke a bit about if somebody is having difficulty dressing themselves or supporting themselves with personal care, we need to actually allow somebody to be supported the way they want to. And sometimes we need to break down assumptions around how somebody wants to be supported based on who they are, etc. We've got sexist beliefs. So it's about not just breaking down gender roles, etc., things like that. Ageism, assumptions based on religion and yours and the individual you care for, because sometimes people think, oh, because somebody's Christian, they're going to be homophobic, and that's not always the case. And that's the same with all religions. So it's about breaking this down, but at the same time, if somebody isn't religious, you do have to sometimes be careful about the language you use. If you say you're praying for somebody, it can be quite upsetting. And if somebody, for example, has gone through conversion therapy, you've got to think that actually, if you say that I'm praying for you, you might bring back traumatic past, because this is something quite commonly older people have gone through. People have tried to pray the gay away, which is the saying that was used. So you do need sometimes to be careful there with sometimes the language you use. And that just shows how this intersectionality sometimes can really come about, and can be quite complex. So some of the things that we can do to overcome this. So having LGBTQ affirming imagery and conversations. So think about that watch and that panopticon. If we are having regular chats about how inclusive society is, how inclusive we are, having imagery, maybe having the care prides regularly, having just a really positive culture, we would then show that actually we accept people, and we will break down that heteronormativity and that central watcher. And we might have to keep on doing this, because obviously if somebody's got dementia and they forget, or they are dropping back to a previous point in time, we might need to really make it clear. But that is something really positive we can do. Be careful about memory lanes as well. Review its location. I'm not saying don't do reminiscence, but just don't have it in the main corridor where you're forcing people to experience that. Maybe have a corner, and maybe have a customizable or an adaptable memory lane area that you can then put up different pictures, maybe on Velcro, and make it culturally sensitive. And that can be across all of those intersections that we spoke about. Making talk about pronouns the norm. So my pronouns are they, them, as you saw at the beginning of my presentation. I think we should start making this the norm. And I think we're starting to accept pronouns more. Now, we're still not a day-to-day thing, but I say give it a few more years' time. So I think in care, we need to keep up with that. Start talking about pronouns a bit more. Think about safe spaces. Also, LGBTQ intergenerational projects. I've heard of these working amazingly. And even if, and it doesn't just have to be for people who you think are LGBTQ in the care home. Older people love spending time with younger people. We know the impact of intergenerational projects generally. And so we can just create this and have diverse people in the intergenerational projects, which again works very well with the beginning bit of making it a safe and making it a diverse environment. Providing dementia literature in LGBT settings. Now, this is something that I really want to start working on now, going to LGBT centres, even venues, even nightclubs, and at least having talks, having literature about what you might need to put in place when you get older. Things like the advanced care plan, things like lasting power of attorney. If you've got somebody who is, maybe you're not married, somebody who's got family of choice, all of these things that you can put down what you'd like to be careful, because we do have individual needs and these do need to be communicated. And I think having these discussions and putting this down when you are able to is really important. And I think this is a key thing for our community. Again, that education around advanced care planning and lasting power of attorney there. And then when caring for LGBTQ plus people, we need to not enforce our norms. So we need to actually think, again, even if we are from the LGBTQ plus community, I know I am, and I still committed a lot of these microaggressions before, because sometimes we just don't think about them. But we need to remember that it's not a homogenous community. We need to also think that we need to just ask questions. We need to unpick our way of thinking and break that down, that maybe we're thinking from a very cisgendered heterosexual perspective. But we also just need to do a bit more of our homework. There needs to be more training for healthcare professionals. And I think a lot of the mistakes that happen, it's not the health and social care professionals' fault. There just isn't the training, there isn't the awareness out there. So that needs to massively improve as well. So these are some of the things that we need to really do. We really do need a massive culture shift, really, to try and make things far better. This is a fantastic image, really, here. And this is about how to be an ally. And this really came about around the Black Lives Matter movement. But it's just a really good point, really, to know that if what happens when you make a mistake and what you need to do. Intent versus impact. Now, you might not mean to make a mistake, and that's absolutely fine. But you do need to let down your defenses. If you become over defensive, then you're not really listening to the person, and you need to appreciate you might not have meant to cause offense, but you have. So you need to apologize and move forward and make the work to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because if you're just over defensive, you are not giving the impression that you're listening. And that is sometimes then where the tensions come from and the difficulties and the arguments, etc. So this is just something generally, but I think particularly with people living with dementia, you need to then really work hard to then make sure that that person feels supported, and think about that panopticon and make sure that that person doesn't feel like they're still dropped back to that previous point in time where they didn't feel accepted. I wanted to just share this slide, really, and this is one of the last slides. I just want to share some of the positive work. So I've shared a lot of things that we need to think about, but there is some really positive work happening out there. So you've got loads of fantastic organisations. There's local organisations like Out Together here, Aging with Pride, who do a lot of training with care and healthcare professionals. A lot of care homes are starting to do their Pride events, which is fantastic. And it really helps with that, again, that central watcher. There's a lot of work. There's some of us now, it's becoming a growing area of research interest and practice development. LGBT healthcare in general, which then leads into aging and dementia. There's organisations like the LGBT Foundation that are bringing dementia out. You've got Opening Doors London, which is I believe the Pride in Care here. You've got Pride in Practice from the LGBT Foundation, which is more the GP side of things. And then you've got organisations like Tonic, which have really started to gain traction in their publicity recently. And they are Europe's first LGBT retirement setting, and they're based in London. And they're fantastic, and it's creating the safe spaces. And Manchester have one also hot on the heels, really, working with care organisations to also create a similar thing in Manchester. So it's about giving that opportunity that actually LGBTQ plus people might want to stay with other LGBT people. Like we use safe spaces like bars because we feel safe in them. It could be the same when you're older, when you're a bit more vulnerable, when you've got dementia, etc. You might want to live the rest of your years also in somewhere where you feel a bit more safe. And then the last link at the bottom is something called Skills First. They're a warning body, and they've developed an LGBTQ community qualification, level 2 qualification in care settings, and they have a module on dementia, but they just generally look at all care settings. But that has also got funding that actually a lot of organisations have started to adopt that and put that out. So that's quite a good thing, and it's about making things a bit more accessible and learning about LGBTQ plus needs in health and social care more accessible. So that is really the brief introduction, and I'd like to give a bit of time now for questions, if that is okay. We've got time for that.
Hi, Phil. Yeah, absolutely, indeed. I'll tell you what you could do. I think Hazel just asked, is any possible ability to post that link in the chat? I don't know if you can grab it from your presentation. If I just stop your screen share, you might be able to copy that and pop it into the chat for Hazel.
Is that the qualification one?
Yeah, the one at the bottom was Skills for Health. I think that would be useful. Fabulous. So there's got a couple of questions on there. I'm going to give people a minute or so because we've got a few minutes left before we wrap this up. So please do pop in the Q&A if you have any questions for Phil. I'm just going to do some shameless plugs in the interim. So let me just share my screen for you. First shameless plug are these guys who are the bluelighted.org. And these guys have just written some educational books. So anybody in the ambulance service tonight, these guys have just wrote some educational books for key stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 and further education, all about the ambulance service and the science of the ambulance service. Now, I've been in the ambulance service 20 odd years and I read this book and I was very surprised at the science behind it because I didn't really know. And I don't think they taught me at university either. And plug number 2 is our National Ambulance resource pack, and also on there you can also get the trans pack. I don't know where my camera is, so there's also some downloads as well as some free CPD resources. So please do pop over to the website, and it's National Ambulance LGBT Network, and there is some amazing resources on there. So please do have a quick peek. We've also got a symposium coming up shortly. So if you are interested in spotting a sick child, then Dr. Deshana and her colleague will be doing the spotting symposium on the Saturday, the 12th of March, 2022 from 9 o'clock till 1 p.m. And I think there's about 11 tickets left for that event off the top of my head. We have got some webinars coming up shortly. It seems a bit blurred, that to me. We've got the 3rd of March, got Dr. Mike talking continuing medical education. I can't even say that word. Her to God, yeah. Gosh, next. March 8th, transient loss of consciousness with Ben Roberts. And we've got March 10th, prioritizing healthcare leadership. So if anybody's interested in leadership, we've got a series of 4 webinars coming up shortly, presented by Rusty. And so that's an absolute not to miss, because I had a weekend with Rusty last week doing some walk and talks, and it was amazing. So please do jump onto the website, or you can register via the app, of course, if you've got the app. But honestly, he's an inspiring leader. So please do jump over there and have a look. Right, let's have a look at some questions, Phil. So first one we have is everywhere. How do you think we should be managing those who identify as gender not assigned at birth on the ward? At the moment, we do the whole male thing, female thing there. Apologies if I'm using the wrong language. What's your thoughts, Phil?
So I have done a little bit of work. It's a couple of years old now. I had it published. I can actually share that link in a minute because it's open access article where I explored really this idea in hospitals and the issue of transgender healthcare, particularly. Unfortunately, hospitals are not set up particularly for people who are non-binary or do not identify on the binary. There is very much a very difficult process, really. I know they're working on it at the moment, but hospitals are not set up because that is part of the issue, is the fact that everything's been set up with a binary, and now we're in this really awkward situation. It should be, where possible, about asking the person where they would feel most comfortable to be on. But then obviously you have that difficulty of actually maybe having other people feel uncomfortable, and whether the CQC are happy with what some people who are very much focused on the binary see as a mixed sex ward then. So really we need to break down a lot of approaches to what we do, and my article really is more posing more questions than it really answers any, because we are not in a position to be in a good place. It's just really, there needs to be more focus, and side rooms are not the fix, because then you're segregating people. So really we need to think more ethically about allowing people to self-identify as who they are, legally have that protection, and then be able to be on the wards they identify as. And that's really what we need.
Got a question from Peter, Phil. Do you ever get situations where care home residents with dementia have essentially hidden their sexuality or preferred gender identity during their lives, but the dementia has led to this part of their identity becoming evident? Not sure how well that sounded, but it makes sense. It sounded really well, and I get that, Peter. So
no. Yeah, no, it does definitely make sense. And it is something that we do see quite often. So I talk a lot about how the dementia can cause somebody to maybe go back into the closet, but actually it can sometimes free somebody to feel more comfortable to be their authentic self, because then they kind of break free from some of the systems, and they're not as aware of some of those systems to a certain degree. So yeah, we do sometimes see that there is sometimes difficulty with family members dealing with it, and I think that's then when you need that holistic support where you can support family members to come to terms with that, but it's not always easy. And then with gender identity, sometimes family members don't understand it, and I think the bottom line sometimes is that you need to care for the person with dementia first. So actually, you need to be really careful that the family members are not enforcing very binary heteronormative things on, but you do need still obviously try and support the family member. But it is something we do see, and it is a very challenging situation, and it's really about being able to provide support to both, really, because that's needed in the time.
Thanks, Phil. Alan has said, as a lawyer in the medical arena and a practitioner, I struggle with this. In order to draw down funding and assistance for disabled persons, one must have a disabling label, and to trigger such help. Yet, in the multisexual society, labeling is frowned upon, and also some people in quite high-ranking roles often say they find it being labelled as straight or CIS gendered is offensive. Any advice or opinions?
Yeah, I haven't got many advice, because it'd be about breaking the system and starting again, which we can't really do. But yeah, no, I 100% agree. Labels have a very positive thing, such as getting funding, solidarity, etc. It helps people to, if you've got a label, you've got an identity, you can wave a flag and you can feel really validated. But then at the same time, some people do feel oppressed. I do find it quite an interesting thing about the people finding cisgender and straight being offensive. And I think that is generally because people have always had the power of being the accepted norm. And then as soon as you have a label assigned to you, because then you realize that there are the people that exist, you are scared of losing that power. And I'll be honest, I think the people who find it a technical term, just stating who they are, is offensive, is scared of losing the power. And unfortunately, from people within the LGBTQ community, we've had to deal with that all our life. So it's about, yes, it is an issue. We don't like labels, but I think people who really shout and scream about how offensive cisgendered and straight is, now you're getting a bit of feeling what we've got that you've probably had in society. And that's quite a damning thing to say, but it is kind of what I believe.
Fabulous. Thanks, Phil. We've got a couple of reviews tonight on Trustpilot. I can see one that's coming from Alice and one that's coming from Sarah. So we've only got two, and I normally give away 2 vouchers. So I'm going to do a live draw tomorrow on Twitter. So if anybody does leave us any reviews overnight tonight, I will make sure that we do a live draw tomorrow on Twitter to ensure that it's fair and equal. Last question we've got from Naima is, how might you manage someone with a more advanced dementia whose identity might fluctuate? For example, considering that their memory might revert back to their when there was a child on occasions. That's a really good question.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And I'm going to use, so I've just spoken a little bit about being obviously lesbian, gay, all that side. But if we think about being trans, because then people quite often explore this idea about being trans. And I think there's this fallacy that people drop back to a time before they were trans. And I think it's really important to know that actually most of us, and I identify as trans because I'm non-binary, I do have gender dysphoria, I do look at my body different, etc. We know there's something not right with us from a very early age. So we generally don't drop back to a time before we're trans because we've always been trans. But we do sometimes have a bit of confusion with our physical body, particularly if we have gone through a gender affirming surgery or we have changed our presentation. There might be that confusion. So you might need to just actually speak to someone again, just ask, oh, I'm really sorry, I've forgotten your name. What's your name? And then you can tell them from what gender or what name they're giving you, where maybe they are in their journey or in their gender presentation. But also just don't be afraid to ask. And I think that is something that we need to become a lot better at, a lot of people find it very uncomfortable to ask around LGBT stuff, and I think we just need to become more comfortable. So it's about being flexible, allowing somebody to define their own gender in that moment, but also about making somebody feel supported, feel safe, etc. So some of those things about that heteronormative panopticon that I spoke about, it's about making that environment feel safe. So all those things, and then that would allow somebody, when they are fluctuating between their memory, to always feel safe and be themselves.
Phil, thank you so much indeed yet again for another engaging webinar. And I know we've got you back again, haven't we, later next month, in fact, is it? Yeah. Yep. 22nd of March. Yep. So you'll be able to jump onto the CPDme.com and find Phil's webinar listed on there. So for those people who are out there tonight at home, kick off your slippers, enjoy the rest of your evening, maybe pour yourself a glass of peppermint tea and relax with a big deep breath. For those who are working, please stay safe. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for supporting CPDme as always. And thank you for Phil for presenting such an engaging presentation.
Thank you so much.
Phil, take care. Everybody, thanks so much and have a good night. Some amazing good comments coming through now on chat for you, Phil. So I'll leave it open for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much indeed. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.